was a warm, sticky summer night in the city, the kind of evening where the air felt heavy and the streets were alive with the hum of cars and distant chatter. Two rookie cops were cruising through the neighborhood in their patrol car, their windows rolled down to let in whatever breeze they could catch. They weren't exactly seasoned veterans, just a couple of young guys still figuring out the ropes of the job. So far, their shift had been pretty dull. A few parking violations, some noise complaints, but nothing exciting. That's when they spotted it. A beat-up old sedan swerving lazily between lanes up ahead. At first glance, it didn't look like the driver was drunk or anything, just distracted. Still, it was enough to make the officers exchange a quick look. One of them hit the siren briefly, signaling for the car to pull over. The sedan slowly drifted to the curb, its tires screeching slightly as it came to a stop. The younger cop hopped out first, his flashlight already in hand. He approached the driver's side cautiously, shining the beam into the car. What he saw surprised him. Sitting behind the wheel was a black man, probably in his late 40s or early 50s. He wasn't wearing some ratty old hoodie or baggy jeans like they might have expected. Instead, he was dressed sharp, like really sharp. A crisp suit, polished shoes, and this calm, almost regal expression on his face. It was such a contrast to the dented, rusty car he was driving that it made the officers pause for a second. "License and registration, please," the younger cop said, his tone clipped and official. But there was something else in his voice, too, a hint of mockery. Maybe it was the mismatch between the fancy suit and the junker car that got to him. Or maybe it was just the way the man sat there so composed, like he owned the place instead of being stuck on the side of the road. The older cop joined him a moment later, glancing at the car's interior. "What do we have here?" he muttered, under his breath chuckling softly. "Looks like someone rented their outfit from a thrift store." The younger one snickered. "Yeah, probably thinks dressing up will save him from a ticket." They weren't trying to be quiet about it. Their laughter carried through the humid air, bouncing off the car windows. If the driver heard them, he didn't show it. He simply reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and handed over his license and registration without saying a word. There was no anger in his eyes, no frustration, just this quiet confidence that made the officers feel even more amused. Back at their patrol car, the two cops leaned against the hood, flipping through the paperwork. "Look at this guy's name," the younger one said, squinting at the license. "Robert Thompson sounds like someone's grandpa. Maybe he's a preacher or something," the older cop joked. "You know, those types who think quoting scripture gets them out of trouble." They laughed again, feeling invincible. To them, this was just another routine stop. Another nobody trying to act big. They didn't bother checking the details too closely. Why would they? Everything about the situation screamed ordinary. Little did they know, this traffic stop was about to become anything but ordinary. As they prepped the ticket for expired tags, the younger cop grinned. "Let's go teach Mr. Fancy Suit a lesson," he said, slapping the clipboard shut. "See how far his suit takes him now?" Neither of them realized that in a matter of minutes their whole world was about to change, and not in a good way. The two officers sauntered back to the sedan with an air of superiority, their boots crunching against the gravel by the side of the road. The younger one held the clipboard tightly in his hand, already imagining how this would go down. In his mind, it was simple. They'd hand over the ticket, maybe throw in a few sarcastic remarks for good measure, and then leave the man sitting there fuming. He glanced at his partner, who smirked back, clearly enjoying the moment too. When they reached the car, the older cop leaned casually against the doorframe, crossing his arms like he owned the place. "All right, buddy," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "We've got you on expired tags, so here's your ticket." He waved the paper in front of the driver as if it were some kind of trophy, but instead of reacting the way they expected, getting defensive or pleading for leniency, the man just sat there silently. His expression didn't change. No anger, no embarrassment, nothing. It was almost eerie how calm he seemed. The younger cop frowned. This wasn't how these things usually went. Most people either argued or groveled when faced with a ticket. But this guy, he looked like he was waiting for something. For a split second, the officer felt uneasy, but he quickly shook it off. After all, what did he have to worry about? They had the authority here, not some random guy in a fancy suit driving a junker. You know, the older cop continued, leaning in closer now, his voice laced with mockery. Maybe if you spent less time pretending to be somebody and more time fixing up your ride, we wouldn't have to pull you over. His partner snickered. Yeah, seriously. Who even wears a suit like that to drive around in this piece of junk? He gestured toward the rusted sedan, shaking his head dramatically. Looks like you're trying way too hard, pal. They waited for a reaction, a protest, a glare, anything. But none came. Instead, the man gave them a faint smile, almost like he knew something they didn't. The officers exchanged a quick glance, unsure of what to make of it. Was he messing with them? Or was he just clueless? The older cop decided to push harder. What's the deal, huh? You some big-shot lawyer or something? Is that why you're dressed like you're heading to court? Still no response. The man simply rested his hands on the steering wheel, his gaze steady and unwavering. For a brief moment, the younger cop wondered if they'd misjudged the situation. Maybe this guy really was somebody important. But then he dismissed the thought almost immediately. Important people didn't drive cars like this. Important people didn't get pulled over for minor traffic violations. Right? Feeling emboldened again, the older cop leaned in even further, practically invading the man's personal space. Listen, buddy, he said, his voice low and threatening. You might think you're hot stuff, but out here you're nobody. Got it? That's when the man finally spoke. His voice was calm, measured, and carried a weight that made both officers straighten up instinctively. I understand, he said simply, nodding slightly. Then, without another word, he reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. For a fleeting second, the officers tensed, their training kicking in. Was he reaching for a weapon? Their hands hovered near their holsters, ready to react. But instead of pulling out anything dangerous, the man retrieved a sleek black wallet. He flipped it open with deliberate slowness, revealing a badge inside. A golden shield gleamed under the dim streetlight, catching their attention instantly. Beneath the badge were words that sent chills down their spines. Director, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Time seemed to stop. The officers stared at the badge, their smirks vanishing as reality crashed down on them. Their faces turned pale, their mouths hanging open in shock. Every cruel joke, every mocking comment, they replayed it all in their heads, each word cutting deeper than before. The man closed, the wallet slowly tucking it back into his pocket. When he spoke again, his tone was cool but firm. Gentlemen, he said, meeting their wide-eyed stares. I trust you'll remember this encounter the next time you assume someone's worth based on appearances. Neither officer could find the words to respond. They stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. All the confidence they'd walked up with had evaporated, replaced by sheer panic. They weren't dealing with just any citizen anymore. They were face to face with the highest-ranking official in the entire FBI. As the gravity of the situation sank in, the younger cop stammered, Sir, we didn't realize. It was just a joke. The older cop tried to salvage whatever dignity he had left. Director, please, it was all a misunderstanding. We were, testing your credentials. Even as the words left his mouth, he knew how ridiculous they sounded. The man didn't laugh or yell. He didn't need to. His silence said everything. With a final glance at the officers, he slid the car into gear and drove off, leaving them standing there in stunned disbelief. It took several minutes for the officers to move. When they finally did, their steps felt heavy, weighed down by shame and dread. What had started as a routine traffic stop had spiraled into something far worse, a lesson neither of them would ever forget. And as they climbed back into their patrol car, one thing became painfully clear. They'd made a mistake that could cost them everything. The drive back to the station was silent. Neither officer said a word as they sat in the patrol car, their radios crackling faintly with updates from other units. The younger cop gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. His partner stared out the window, avoiding eye contact, but it was clear both of them were replaying the scene in their minds over and over again. How had they missed it? How could they have been so blind? That badge, the golden shield, it wasn't something you saw every day, and yet they'd treated the man like he was nobody, like he was just another faceless driver who didn't matter. Now, the weight of what they'd done pressed down on them harder than anything they'd ever faced before. When they finally pulled into the station parking lot, the older cop turned to his partner. "We need to figure this out," he said, his voice low and shaky. "If anyone finds out about this—" "Finds out?" the younger one interrupted, his voice rising in panic. "Are you kidding me? This is going to blow up. He's the FBI director. You think he's just going to let this slide?" For once, the older cop didn't have a snappy comeback. He knew his partner was right. People like that, people at the top, they didn't forget things easily, especially not something like this. They'd mocked him, insulted him, acted like he was beneath them. And now, they were going to pay the price. Inside the station, they found themselves pacing nervously. Near the break room, other officers glanced at them curiously, sensing something was off. Normally, these two were full of jokes and swagger, but tonight they looked like ghosts. Finally, the older cop decided they needed to talk to someone higher up. Someone who might know how to handle this mess. They approached their sergeant, a grizzled veteran with decades of experience under his belt. He was sitting at his desk, sipping coffee and reviewing reports when they walked in. At first, he raised an eyebrow, surprised to see them back so soon. "What's up, boys?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. "You look like you've seen a ghost." The younger cop hesitated, glancing at his partner for support. When no one spoke, the sergeant frowned. "All right, spit it out. What happened?" It took some coaxing, but eventually the story came tumbling out. The traffic stop, the jokes, the badge, all of it. By the time they finished, the sergeant's coffee cup was halfway to his mouth, frozen in midair. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then he slowly set the cup down and leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "You're telling me," he began, his voice dangerously calm, "that you two clowns pulled over the FBI director and laughed at him?" Neither officer could meet his gaze. They nodded silently, shame burning in their chests. The sergeant pinched the bridge of his nose, clearly trying to process what he just heard. "Do you even realize what this means?" he asked, his tone sharp now. "This isn't just some minor screw-up. This is career-ending stuff. Do you understand that?" "We didn't mean to," the younger cop blurted out, desperation creeping into his voice. "We thought he was just some guy. We didn't recognize him." "That's the problem," the sergeant shot back, slamming, his hand on the desk. "You judged him based on how he looked, not who he was. You treated him like he didn't matter because of his car, his clothes, his skin color. Did that cross your mind even once?" The room fell silent. Both officers shifted uncomfortably, unable to argue. Deep down, they knew he was right. They'd made assumptions, dangerous ones, and those assumptions had led them straight into disaster. After a tense pause, the sergeant sighed and rubbed his temples. "Look," he said, his voice softer now. "There's nothing I can do to fix this. This goes way above my pay grade. But here's what you're going to do. Write up a full report of everything that happened. Leave nothing out. If you try to cover this up, it'll only make things worse." "But what happens next?" the older cop asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Will we lose our jobs?" The sergeant shook his head. "I don't know. That depends on him. If he decides to press charges or file a complaint, there's not much anyone can do to protect you. But if he lets this slide—" He trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. The two officers left the office feeling like they'd been punched in the gut. Every step felt heavier than the last. As they headed back to their patrol car, the younger cop muttered, "Do you think he'll go easy on us? Maybe he won't say anything?" His partner shook his head bitterly. "You really believe that? After what we did? No way. Guys like him don't forget. And honestly, why should they?" That night, neither of them slept. They lay awake, staring at the ceiling, dreading the morning. News traveled fast in law enforcement circles, and by sunrise, everyone would know what had happened. Their colleagues, their superiors, the entire department. It wouldn't take long for the whispers to start. And once the story got out, there'd be no hiding from it. As dawn broke, the younger cop grabbed his phone and scrolled through social media. Sure enough, rumors were already spreading online. Someone had leaked details of the incident and comments were flooding in. Some people were laughing at them, calling them idiots for messing with the wrong guy. Others were furious, accusing them of racism and abuse of power. It seemed like the whole world was watching and judging. By the time they reported for duty the next day, the atmosphere at the station was electric. Officers who usually joked around with them now avoided eye contact. Even the dispatchers seemed uneasy, keeping conversations to a minimum. It was clear their lives had changed forever. Whether they liked it or not, they were now at the center of a scandal that showed no signs of dying down. And somewhere in the back of their minds, they couldn't help but wonder, what was the FBI director doing right now? Was he planning to ruin them? Or was he letting them sweat it out, waiting to see how far they'd fall? Either way, one thing was certain. They'd never forget the lesson they'd learned that night. The days that followed felt like living in a nightmare. Every morning, the two officers woke up dreading what new developments might come their way. The story of their encounter with the FBI director had spread like wildfire, not just within the department, but across the entire city. Local news outlets picked it up, turning it into headline news. Cops mock FBI chief during traffic stop was splashed across newspapers and websites, accompanied by grainy photos of the officer's patrol car and endless speculation about what had happened. At first, they tried to ignore it. They went through the motions of their daily routines, showing up for shifts, filing reports, and responding to calls. But it was impossible to pretend everything was normal. Their colleagues treated them differently now, some with pity, others with thinly veiled disgust. Conversation stopped whenever they entered a room, and even the simplest tasks felt unbearable, under the weight of everyone's stares. One afternoon, the younger cop found himself sitting alone in the break room, staring blankly at his coffee cup. He wasn't drinking it. He just needed something to hold on to while his mind raced. His partner walked in a few minutes later, looking equally worn out. Neither said a word as they sat there together, the silence between them heavy with unspoken thoughts. Finally, the older cop broke the quiet. "You think anyone will ever trust us again?" he asked, his voice low and rough. The younger one shrugged, avoiding eye contact. "Doesn't matter if they do or not," he muttered. "We're done. Even if we keep our badges, no one's going to respect us after this." His partner sighed deeply, running a hand over his face. "I keep thinking about what he said. That line about assumptions. Man, I can't get it out of my head." "Me neither," the younger cop admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I see him pulling out that badge. Like, bam. Just like that. Game over." They both fell silent again, lost in their own guilt and shame. It wasn't just fear of losing their jobs that haunted them. It was the realization of how wrong they'd been. How quick they were to judge someone based on superficial things. A beat-up car, a sharp suit, the color of his skin. They hadn't given him a second thought until it was too late. Meanwhile, higher-ups in the department were scrambling to contain the fallout. Internal Affairs launched an investigation, interviewing witnesses, reviewing footage from nearby cameras, and poring over every detail of the incident. Both officers were placed on administrative leave pending the results, a move that felt more like punishment than precaution. Without their uniforms to hide behind, they were left exposed, vulnerable to public scrutiny. To make matters worse, the media circus only grew louder. Talk shows debated whether the officers' behavior was an isolated incident or part of a larger pattern of systemic bias in policing. Social media exploded with opinions, some calling for immediate firings, others defending the officers as victims of circumstance. Amid all the noise, one thing became painfully clear. Their actions had tapped into a much bigger conversation about race, authority, and accountability. Amid the chaos, the FBI director remained eerily silent. Days passed without any official statement from him or his office. No charges were filed, no complaints lodged, at least not publicly. This silence only added to the officer's anxiety. Was he biding his time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike? Or had he decided to let them twist in the wind, learning their lesson slowly and painfully? Their families weren't spared either. Friends and relatives called constantly, offering advice or venting their frustrations. Some urged them to fight back, insisting they'd made an honest mistake. Others lectured them about privilege and prejudice, demanding they take responsibility for their actions. Through it all, the officers felt increasingly isolated, unsure of whom to turn to or trust. One evening, the younger cop met up with an old mentor, a retired detective who'd always been straight with him. Over beers at a dimly lit bar, he poured out his heart, recounting every agonizing detail of the traffic stop. When he finished, the mentor leaned back in his chair, studying him carefully. "You messed up," he said bluntly. "No sugarcoating it. You judged him before you knew who he was, and that's something people don't forgive easily." "I know," the younger cop replied, his voice cracking. "But what do I do now? How do I fix this?" The mentor took a long sip of his drink before answering. "First off, stop thinking about fixing it for yourself. Start thinking about what you owe him. You humiliated him in front of his peers, and that's not something you can undo with a simple apology. What you can do is change the way you treat people moving forward. Show some humility. Learn from this." It was easier said than done, but the words stuck with him. That night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he replayed the mentor's advice in his mind. Maybe this wasn't just about saving his career or even his reputation. Maybe it was about proving to himself that he could be better than the person he'd been that night. Back at the station, preparations were underway for mandatory sensitivity training sessions. Officers across the department were required to attend, including the two involved in the incident. Flyers plastered on bulletin boards announced workshops on implicit bias, cultural competency, and de-escalation techniques. For most cops, these sessions were seen as a nuisance, a box to check so they could get back to work. But for the two officers, they carried a deeper significance. They knew they couldn't afford to blow them off, not if they wanted to salvage any shred of credibility. As the first session approached, the younger cop felt a mix of dread and determination. He didn't want to sit through hours of lectures and role-playing exercises, but he also recognized the need for it. If nothing else, he owed it to himself, and to the man whose life they'd disrupted, to listen, learn, and grow. Little did he know the hardest part was yet to come. The training wouldn't just challenge his understanding of policing, it would force him to confront uncomfortable truths about himself. And while the road ahead promised to be difficult, it also offered a glimmer of hope, a chance to rebuild one small step at a time. The sensitivity training sessions turned out to be more intense than either officer had anticipated. Held in a drab conference room at the precinct, the workshops were led by experts brought in from outside agencies, people who specialized in addressing bias, systemic inequality, and accountability within law enforcement. The room was packed with officers, some rolling their eyes or muttering under their breath about political correctness, while others sat quietly, arms crossed, clearly uncomfortable, but unwilling to admit it. For the two officers involved in the infamous traffic stop, these sessions weren't just another boring seminar. They felt like punishment. Every lecture, every role-playing exercise, every group discussion seemed tailored to highlight their mistakes. They couldn't help but feel like everyone else in the room knew exactly why they were there, even though no one explicitly mentioned the incident. The weight of their shame hung heavy over them, making each passing minute feel longer than the last. One session stood out in particular. It started with a simple question posed by the facilitator. What assumptions do you make when you approach someone during a routine stop? At first, most officers hesitated to answer, unsure of how much honesty was expected. But as the conversation unfolded, opinions began pouring out. Some defensive, others reflective. I assume they're nervous, one officer said. Most people are scared when they see flashing lights behind them. Another chimed in. I look for signs of danger. Is this person hiding something? Are they a threat? The younger cop listened intently, his stomach churning as he realized how many of these so-called assumptions mirrored his own thoughts that night. He hadn't seen the man in the sedan as a potential threat. Instead, he'd dismissed him outright based on superficial details, the car, the suit, the calm demeanor. None of those things should have mattered. Yet they'd clouded his judgment completely. When the facilitator turned to him and asked, "What about you? What goes through your mind?" He froze. All eyes shifted toward him, waiting for an answer. For a moment, he considered brushing off the question with a generic response, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the memory of the director's steady gaze or the sting of his own guilt. Whatever it was, he found himself speaking honestly for the first time in weeks. I guess I sometimes jump to conclusions," he admitted, his voice trembling slightly. "That night I thought I knew who he was before I even talked to him. I didn't give him a chance to prove me wrong." The room fell silent. Even the facilitator paused, letting the words sink in. Then she nodded slowly and said, "That's human nature, we all make assumptions. But as officers, we have to fight against that instinct. Our job is to protect and serve everyone, not just the people who fit our preconceived ideas of worthiness." Her words hit hard, especially for the older cop sitting nearby. He'd spent years patrolling the streets, priding himself on being tough and unshakable. Yet here he was, humbled by the realization that his confidence had blinded him to the humanity of the very people he was supposed to protect. As the session continued, he found himself reflecting on past encounters, times when he might have judged someone too quickly, treated them unfairly, or let his biases get the better of him. By the end of the day, both officers felt emotionally drained. Walking back to their cars, they exchanged glances but said little. There was no need for words, they both understood the gravity of what they'd learned. These weren't just lessons meant to improve their policing skills. They were reminders of their responsibility as human beings. Back home, the younger cop struggled to sleep. His mind kept replaying moments from the training, the heated discussions, the uncomfortable silences, the raw honesty of some of his colleagues. One story stuck with him in particular. An older female officer had shared how she once pulled over a young black man late at night and immediately assumed he was up to no good. She'd barked orders at him, searched his car aggressively, and sent him on his way without finding anything suspicious. Later, she discovered he was a college student heading home after tutoring kids in the community. The guilt had stayed with her ever since. He wondered if she'd ever apologized to the man. Probably not. It wasn't easy admitting fault, especially in a profession where authority was everything. But maybe that was the point. Maybe true growth came from acknowledging your mistakes, no matter how painful it felt. The next morning, he decided to write a letter. Not to the FBI director, not yet, but to himself. In it, he listed all the ways he'd failed that night, laughing at someone's expense, assuming the worst, forgetting his duty to treat everyone with respect. Writing it down made it real, forcing him to confront the truth head-on. When he finished, he tucked the letter into a drawer, promising to revisit it whenever doubt crept in. Meanwhile, the fallout from the incident continued to ripple outward. Community leaders called for reforms within the department, demanding stricter oversight and better training programs. Local activists organized protests outside police headquarters, holding signs that read, "Accountability starts here," and "Justice for all." Some officers grumbled about the attention, insisting they were being unfairly targeted, but others recognized the importance of listening to the community's concerns. Even national news outlets picked up the story again, framing it as a turning point for law enforcement practices. Experts debated whether incidents like this could lead to meaningful change or if they'd fade into obscurity once public interest waned. Through it all, the FBI director remained silent, leaving everyone to speculate about his next move. Despite the uncertainty, the two officers began taking small steps toward redemption. They volunteered for extra shifts in underserved neighborhoods, hoping to rebuild trust one interaction at a time. They attended additional training sessions, soaking up every lesson they could, and though they still carried the weight of their mistake, they also felt a flicker of hope, a belief that they could become better versions of themselves. It wouldn't happen overnight, and it certainly wouldn't erase what had happened. But Somewhere deep inside, they knew they had a choice. Let this moment define them forever, or use it as a catalyst for change. For the first time in weeks, they chose the latter. Months had passed since that fateful night, but the memory of it lingered like a shadow over the two officers. Life at the precinct had settled into a tense rhythm. The initial storm of media attention and public outrage had died down, but whispers about the incident still floated through the halls. Colleagues who once joked around with them now kept their distance, unsure of what to say or how to act. Some treated them with quiet disdain, while others offered hesitant support. It was clear, things would never be the same. The younger cop found himself reflecting on the changes in his life during long drives home from work. He used to love the feeling of sliding behind the wheel of his patrol car, the sense of purpose that came with wearing the badge. Now, though, every shift felt heavier, burdened by the knowledge that one careless moment could define your entire career. And maybe your character, too. He remembered something his mentor had said during their meeting months ago. You can't change the past, but you can decide what kind of person you want to be moving forward. At the time, those words felt hollow, like just another platitude meant to soften the blow. But as weeks turned into months, they began to take root in his mind. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he started making changes, not big ones, but small, deliberate actions that added up over time. For instance, he made an effort to introduce himself more warmly when approaching drivers during traffic stops. Instead of barking orders or immediately jumping to conclusions, he'd start with a simple, "Hi, I'm Officer Last Name. Is everything okay?" It wasn't much, but it humanized the interaction, reminding both parties that they were dealing with real people, not stereotypes. He also began asking questions before assuming anything. Questions like, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Or, "Is there anything I should know about tonight?" His partner noticed the shift and followed suit, albeit reluctantly at first. The older cop had always prided himself on being tough, unyielding, the kind of officer who commanded respect, without asking for it. But after everything that had happened, he realized toughness alone wasn't enough. Respect had to be earned, and earning it required humility, a quality he hadn't valued much before. One evening, as they wrapped up their shift, the younger cop turned to his partner. "Do you think we'll ever get past this?" he asked, his voice tinged with frustration. "Or are we just stuck like this forever?" The older cop shrugged, leaning against the hood of their patrol car. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I think we're doing better than we were. People notice little things, like how we talk to folks now. Maybe it's not enough to fix everything, but it's something." They stood there in silence for a moment, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, casting long shadows across the parking lot. For the first time in months, neither of them felt the need to fill the quiet with meaningless chatter. They simply existed in the moment, letting the weight of their journey settle around them. Around the same time, the FBI director re-emerged, in the public eye, not to address the incident directly, but to speak about broader issues affecting law enforcement. In interviews and speeches, he emphasized the importance of accountability, empathy, and reform within policing. His words carried weight, especially coming from someone who had personally experienced the consequences of bias and arrogance. During one particularly memorable appearance, he recounted a story about a young boy he'd met years ago while visiting a community center in a struggling neighborhood. The boy had asked him, "How do you know if a cop is good or bad?" The question had stuck with him ever since, shaping the way he approached leadership and policy making. "A good cop," he explained, "isn't defined by their uniform or their title. It's defined by how they treat people, even when no one's watching, especially when no one's watching." Those words resonated deeply with the two officers. Though the director never mentioned them specifically, they couldn't help but feel like the message was meant for them. It wasn't forgiveness or absolution, it was guidance, a reminder that redemption wasn't out of reach if they were willing to work for it. As months stretched into a year, the officers' efforts began to bear fruit. Community relations improved slightly, thanks in part to initiatives they helped spearhead. They volunteered at local events, joined outreach programs, and even participated in town hall meetings where residents voiced their concerns about policing practices. These interactions weren't always easy. Some attendees lashed out, accusing them of insincerity or using these opportunities as PR stunts. But instead of getting defensive, they listened. They acknowledged the pain and anger in the room, recognizing that trust couldn't be rebuilt overnight. Their colleagues took notice too. What had started as isolated gestures gradually inspired others to follow suit. More officers began attending training sessions voluntarily, seeking ways to improve their approach to policing. Conversations that once revolved around quotas and statistics shifted toward discussions about fairness, compassion, and justice. Even the sergeant who had reprimanded them early on softened his stance. One day, after observing their progress, he pulled them aside. "You've come a long way," he said gruffly, though there was a hint of pride in his voice. "Don't stop now." Looking back, neither officer could pinpoint exactly when things began to feel different. Maybe it was the day a mother thanked them for helping her find her lost child, or the afternoon they spent playing basketball with teenagers at a rec center, or the quiet nod of approval from a senior officer who had once doubted their ability to change. Whatever it was, they knew they were on the right path. Of course, challenges remained. There were still moments of doubt, days when the weight of their past mistakes threatened to pull them under. But they faced those moments together, leaning on each other for support. They reminded themselves daily that growth wasn't linear. It was messy, uncomfortable, and often painful. But it was worth it. One crisp autumn morning, as they prepared for another shift, the younger cop glanced at his partner and smiled faintly. "Think we'll make it?" he asked, half joking. The older cop grinned back, slapping him lightly on the shoulder. "We already have," he replied. "Now it's about keeping it going." And with that, they climbed into their patrol car, ready to face whatever lay ahead, not as perfect officers, but as flawed humans striving to do better.